Good morning and welcome to Jacob Campbell, legislative candidate from District 29. Thank you, Jacob, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meeting this morning. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today are Susan DeCamp, Bob Lassen, and Danny DeLong, AARP lead advocacy volunteers. Dave Holmquist is our Nebraska AARP state president, and Emily Wick with the state office is also joining us today. Jacob, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. So Jacob, if you want to start us off by giving us a little background about yourself and your campaign, again, aiming for 5 minutes or less, that would be great. And once we've completed your opening, we'll move into the questions. So go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Gina, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'll keep it less than 5 minutes, but so I grew up in Bertrand. It's a little town, the south central part of the state, with 800 people. So if you're familiar with the state, southwest of Kearney or west of Holdridge is where Bertrand is. My mom was the custodian at the school. My dad's a grain elevator operator. I joined the military when I was 17. So the parents had to sign off to join the military when I was 17. That was going to be the way I was going to pay for school. So came to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln to be a teacher. Met my wife in the military as well. So I did 8 years in the Nebraska Army National Guard. I was a military policeman. My wife did 6 years in the Nebraska Army National Guard. She was transportation. After graduation, I was supposed to deploy, so I couldn't really even apply for too many teaching jobs because there was a deployment coming up. You can't leave halfway through the semester if you're the teacher. So I took a job as a child abuse investigator with the state of Nebraska. And then went to work at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where I recruited students primarily from Omaha or the eastern part of the state, but I was also in Iowa and did a little bit of out-of-state travel as well. And then I went to work in the legislature. I worked in the legislature for 3 years, and at the same time, I had a master's degree in public administration from the University of Nebraska-Omaha, and I'll talk a little bit about some of that research with some of that. They're pretty applicable to what we're going to discuss. So a master's in public administration from UNO. Started a business in September 2017. So we actually just hit the 3-year mark. We closed on our first deal the 28th to the 29th. I can't remember exactly. And so it's just 3 years and have transitioned to doing that full time now. So running the campaign, did you ask about the campaign or is this just about me?
Go ahead. That's part of whatever. Go ahead.
Okay, so running the campaign, it was a six-way primary race. Won the primary race with about 33% of the vote. Have been going out still since then. Took a break of door knocking during March, April, and May and June because of COVID. But since then, I've been getting back out and talking to voters at their doors. It has gone really well. A lot of discussing through the glass or a couple conversations through windows. So a lot of social distancing, but it's gone really well. So really excited to be with you here today and excited to get to November 3rd.
Jacob, just a quick follow-up on the business. What type of business is it?
Yeah, I have a rental property business. So a rental property business, and then we're doing some development projects as well.
All right, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. And most importantly, thank you and your wife for the service and the sacrifices that you've made for our country. We appreciate that very much.
Thank you. And you.
Perfect. So we're now going to move into the question section, and we provided you again with a set of 3 questions pertaining to the 50-plus in Nebraska, again, allotting 5 minutes for each of those. Our first question today will come from Danny DeLong, and it addresses helping people stay in their homes and communities. So go ahead, Danny.
Hi, Jacob. I'm a veteran too, and so it's good to see you. A livable community is one that is safe and secure, has housing that is affordable. In other words, no more than 30% of the income is spent on housing. It has transportation options that allow individuals to travel by multiple means, and it has supportive community features and services for people of all ages, allowing people to remain in their communities as they age. This is the question: what steps will you take to ensure all Nebraskans have access to livable communities?
So I appreciate the question quite a bit because that's one of the primary concerns we have moving forward. So, and some of your background information, I'll give a little bit of background. Some of your background information, you talked about the changing demographics. And this is some of the research that I did as far as my master's program. was that essentially 2/3 of the population used to live in Western Nebraska. We'll say west of York. I think there's some sort of stat that it's like 2/3 live west of 27th Street in Lincoln, but I suppose I'm on camera, but don't quote me on that. So, but it's, let's say 2/3 west of York. Now it's 2/3 east of York. A big part of that is because of aging populations moving east, because of the nursing homes, skilled living facilities, assisted living facilities, those sorts of things. So, so that's one area where we have to figure out what we're going to do moving forward anyway, regardless, even before you get to sustainable, livable communities, you have to figure out how are we going to handle this population change, both in the Western Nebraska towns where they're leaving and in the Eastern Nebraska, Lincoln and Omaha primarily, where people are coming. So we have some pretty significant challenges moving forward. But as far as sustainability or living facilities, I think we've got to maintain public safety. So we've seen some threats to that lately. So public safety has to be the utmost concern. Tax sustainability, and I'm going to break that down a little bit here in a second. Transportation, and then homes that are set up for aging populations. So as we see, and I can speak to some of this because this is kind of what I do, right? But transportation is a primary function of government. We have to maintain sustainable transportation. We do that in a couple different ways. Roads and bridges, kind of the buzzwords that people use all the time, but make sure your streets are sufficient, that sort of thing. But also, as the aging population increases and as population shifts to Eastern Nebraska, we do have to look at more inclusive forms of public transportation. We don't have a great public transportation system in the United States, specifically in Nebraska. So that might be something we would have to look at, and I see as a primary function of government. I talked about public safety. So fully funding police officers is something that we have to continue to do as far as public safety goes. Tax sustainability is kind of the number one thing that I look at when we look at how do we make sure that we have sustainable living facilities or sustainable living cities for Nebraskans. So one conversation I had when I was out knocking doors, I talked to a fellow who said that they bought their house 8 years ago. They budgeted appropriately. And now, because of the rising property taxes, they can no longer afford to live in their home. So 8 years ago, they budgeted appropriately based on their income level, bought a house that was well within their means, but because of rising property taxes, which is outside of their control, right? You can't control what your property taxes do, regardless of how savvy you are with your budget. That's something completely outside of your control. They're no longer able to live in their home. They're looking to downsize or move to a different part of town. So that's a major threat, and it's we discussed it a lot in the legislature in regards to rural interests versus urban interests, and I don't see it that way. I see it if property taxes continue to go up like they are in Lincoln and Omaha and the eastern part of the state, that we're going to price a lot of people out of the market, especially when it's going to require new homes. So that's the other piece about having aging populations specifically come to Lincoln, is that we have a lot of split levels, which means we have a lot of stairs. And if you're like my mom, whose knee is busted, you don't want to go up a whole lot of stairs throughout your day. So it's just basic things like first floor laundry, or not having stairs, or being able to park your car and go up one stair to get into your home. Those sorts of things are things we have to be mindful of moving forward when we're creating new home stock. I don't know what my time was there, so I'll kind of get up.
Can I follow up on one just real quick while we're here?
Yes,
You were talking about property taxes. What would you see as an alternative to property taxes?
Yeah, so I think we need to completely change how we fund schools. I've been pretty vocal about this throughout the campaign trail. So that's always the discussion, is it's schools versus property taxes. And I don't think it has to be that way. I also think part of my research at the master's program was in our tax code. So our tax code was written in 1967. It doesn't reflect a modern economy. Things have changed substantially since then. Things are going to change even afterwards because of COVID. So what I think we have to do is completely change how we fund schools, make sure that they're fully funded. I have some ideas on how to do that, but make sure they're fully funded, completely change how we fund schools, and then completely overhaul the tax code. We've tried to do bits and pieces of that. We've tried to tweak something with the school funding formula here, or we've tried to tweak part of the tax code there, and it just doesn't work. We've got to completely rethink how we're doing things. The background information that you gave about most people living alone than any other time in history. We have population changes more than any other time in history. All of this kind of summarizes and adds to the fact that our tax code doesn't work, our school funding formula doesn't work. We need something different.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you, Jacob. Appreciate your answer.
Great. Our second question, we'll switch over now in combination to what we've kind of already discussed, but I think it's a good segue. Susan DeCamp will address that, and it's on health, caregiving, and home and community-based care. So go ahead, Susan.
Good morning, Jacob. Nice to have you with us. Caregivers help older persons live independently at home by providing assistance with activities like bathing and dressing and performing medical and nursing tasks, such as administering medicine and wound care. But caregivers often provide these services with little or no pay and little or no training. So with that in mind, I have a two-part question. First, would you support helping caregivers with things such as paid leave, respite services, telehealth, and access to education and training?
That's first.
Yes,
First
and then
part.
I can go ahead with the second part after you answer the first part.
Okay, got it. So, so yes, I think a lot of those things are things that we absolutely need to be focusing on. So the story, how I'll answer this is my grandma lived in Lexington, Nebraska, on her own. Her husband died when, before I was born. So she was relatively young, I think relatively about 40s, lived on her own her entire life, and wanted to maintain that style of living, wanted to stay in her home, wanted to be around her family. She didn't want to go to a home. And so we probably pushed it a little bit further than maybe we should about keeping her on her own. But it was those sorts of skilled care that made that possible. And Nebraskans are independent. People are independent, but Nebraskans are independent. They want to stay at home. My dad, I think I'm going to have to pry him out of a house, nursing home, if ever it comes to it. I mean, it's just, so we have to be mindful of those things, especially with the background information that you've given on aging populations. And so I worked at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I went to school to be a teacher, but the reality is that we've kind of sold this dream that go to a four-year college, and then once you graduate, you're going to make $80,000 a year, and everything is just going to be wonderful. And that's not necessarily the case. But what we see a lot of times is skilled labor or skilled nursing pay very well, and you don't have to go to a four-year college and get $60,000 worth of debt and able to do it. So I think partly what we have to do is reframe that conversation as well and say, hey, some of these jobs are the things that are going to be needed in the future. If you want job security, if you want a stable income, and then if we want to, and we've got to focus on rewarding those sorts of things as well. So with higher pay, with education, and with making sure that that is seen as a good and positive and noble career as well. So those are some of the things I think we have to change how we do it.
Okay, thanks. And then the second part of the question, which you partly answered, would be how would you protect or expand paid services and supports, as well as financial security that allows more seniors to live independently in their homes and communities?
Yeah, so this sort of environment is a little bit different in that you have private home givers or private caregivers, you have nonprofit caregivers, and you also have government caregivers. So it's usually you don't see all three providing the same services in a lot of these sectors. But when it comes to skilled care or assisted living or at-home care, there's all three are playing in that realm. So it's kind of a mixed approach in how you have to do that, and making sure that one, it's seen as a good job, which I talked about. So that's a private way, a good job. Make sure that there is grant funding and those sorts of things available for the nonprofits, and then also making parity. So parity services like telehealth, I think that was this question. Yes, the telehealth is a major thing. We saw that in COVID. It's a major issue. When you look at rural parts of the state, making sure that they have broadband that can support telehealth is a major issue, something we have to look at moving forward as a priority function of government. So broadband has to be looked at akin to electricity or water, those sorts of things, the way we operate now in this modern economy. So again, I think that would be how you solve some of those issues.
Okay, just one little further question regarding the financial security. Things such as homestead exemption and food security. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, homestead exemption has been a great service. Food security, we've got a lot of public and so private and nonprofit groups that help facilitate that. But as part of this tax code reform that I'm talking about, we have to make sure we're not going to tax groceries. We're not going to tax some of these basic necessities that people see.
Okay, great. Thanks for your answers.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jacob. And our last question now, we'll switch over to nursing facility quality, and Bob Lassen is going to address that. So go ahead, Bob.
Thank you, Jacob, for being here today. I'm going to talk about nursing facility quality. And there's an estimated 6,600 Nebraskans that reside in one of Nebraska's 211 nursing homes. By 2040, the University of Nebraska Omaha projects that number will more than double to almost 14,000 people. Due to a variety of factors over the past few years, Nebraska has seen an increase in nursing facilities having to close and residents having to move and relocate elsewhere. How will you ensure that Nebraska residents receive quality nursing home care, including ensuring an adequate nursing workforce, education and training, and proper reimbursement?
So I appreciate the question, Bob. A couple of those I hit on the last question, and I'll reiterate in this. But one of them is there's been some changes lately as far as receiverships. And maybe this is getting into the weeds a little bit too much, but there's been some changes as far as receiverships that make that more sustainable and make it safer. So put some limits on receiverships, put some more requirements on what you have to do in order to be a receiver, and put some more additional safety requirements. So I think that was a step in the right direction as far as safety, and addresses some of the concerns there about nursing homes closing. And so if a nursing home closes and it goes into receivership, there's going to be increased levels and increased supports as we move forward in the years to come. So that's one aspect of that. The other aspect that I talked about, making sure that people don't view these sorts of jobs as second-class jobs, I think is a real issue. So making sure that, hey, you want to be a skilled nurse, or you want to work in an assisted living or nursing home facility, that's a good job and something that you should be proud of. And so making sure that that's how these things are talked about, but also designing education and training and those sorts of things that are easily accessible, but also support that idea that this is a good job, this is needed, this is a noble service. That you don't have to go to a school and get a 4-year degree and a master's degree and a doctorate in order to amount to something. So I think that's a really harmful myth that we've sold people. So those two things are essential. Workforce issues, I think the tax fairness is part of the workforce issue as well. We talk about a lot of things that are either stopping people from coming to Nebraska or causing them to leave. Well, I've knocked on 10,000 doors over the past year, and a lot of the people I've said, just like what I talked about with the family who bought their home and are now priced out because of property taxes, there's a lot of people who I've talked to that say, when I retire, I've got 2 years left, and then I'm retiring, and then I'm moving out of the state. Yeah. Because of taxes. And it's not all property taxes. There's a lot of different taxes that we have in Nebraska that others don't, or higher rates of taxes. So this tax reform package this tax reform complete overhaul has to be designed in a way that's going to keep people, it's going to attract people, and it's going to spur economic activity. And none of that includes raising the overall tax burden. So I think those three things are how you address some of those questions there, Bob. And you're down to my right, which is why I'm pointing at you. So.
Just to kind of follow up on that, some of the reasons that they give these companies that own the nursing homes is that the reimbursement rates are so low that they just really can't function at that level. Another one is the workforce issue that you've already addressed. But the reimbursement part of it, I know that we're trying to do some things. What would you suggest to maybe make that work a little bit better for Nebraska?
Yeah, I think we've got to increase reimbursement rates. So there's been a few studies in the past few years that have talked about here's what the actual cost is, I think Nebraska just went up, gosh, what was it? The reimbursements race went up in the last biennium. I can't remember exactly how much, but it was an increase, but it was still below what the actual cost of service was, right? Well, how do you expect that to work? So again, it's getting back to what are the basic functions of government. And in the legislature, there's lots of bills that are brought. There's lots of special interests that are brought that are going to, they come with fiscal notes. They come with prices. They come with $100,000 here, or $200,000 there, or $50,000 here. And because the price is so low in the scope of billion-dollar budgets, we look at that and we say, oh, that's a good idea. Let's go ahead and move forward with that. But what we don't realize is that each time that you do that, it takes away from reimbursement rates. It takes away from transportation. It takes away from all these sorts of issues that are the real cause of why the tax burden is so high, that are the real cause of what these special interest projects are meant to. Maybe they're well intended, but they're addressing the symptom rather than the actual issue. So reimbursement rates have to be increased, and we have to maintain that as a focus and priority function of government.
I think a thing that kind of gets lost in that whole scenario too is that when the facilities can't make it on what they're being paid for Medicaid patients, the cost for private pays goes up substantially. And so there's really an imbalance there that probably needs to be corrected for even people who are not in looking at Medicaid. So
well,
I just
right.
want to follow up on that. Yeah.
No, and if I can just expand on that. So a lot of times we talk about these things at high level, but Bob, here's an example of how that was actually worked in my family. So my grandma was private pay for quite a while, and then she went on Medicare. Mm-hmm. Over the COVID crisis, early in the COVID crisis, my grandma has lasted a long time. She's kind of a tank. The early COVID crisis, she really started to go downhill. We couldn't get in to see her. So we couldn't get into the nursing home to see her. We went to the window, but that was just about it. She had severe dementia, didn't necessarily recognize us. The family, so my mom and my aunt were just kind of distraught about not being able to get in to see her. And so the nursing home they called and said, well, she's going to go to hospice. And so we said, when can we get in to see her? And they said, you still can't. And so it was kind of a mess, but eventually we threw a big enough fit that what they had to do is move someone out of private pay room because grandma was sharing a room with somebody, but to move somebody out of a private pay room so we could get in to see her at the end of the hall and be with her when she died. So those are kind of the concerns that because she was on Medicare and was sharing a room with somebody, she had to take somebody else's private pay room, which was a major issue, right? But for the purpose of being able to be with her when she died. So those are some of the sorts of issues that come up that, okay, here's a tangible, practical implication of these sorts of policies that I think get lost all the time.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. And we're getting to the end of our time here for our meeting today. I want to offer the remaining time to you for any final thoughts or closing thoughts or comments or messages you want to send to the constituents in your district. So we have about 3 minutes left. Go ahead.
Three minutes. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. I think what I hope that you come away with is that I know what I'm talking about. So I've done a lot of research in this. I've had a lot of experience in these sorts of issues. So I know what I'm talking about, but I also am willing to go out and talk with people. And again, Bob, to my last example of my grandma and the way she died, is it's not just high level issues. It's how is this actually going to impact a person in their home? How is this actually going to impact a family? Those sorts of things are what I pull policy back to all the time. And that's why I've gone out and knocked on 10,000 doors to talk to people to figure out how is this policy going to impact you? It might be a good idea. It might be a bad idea. I'm not going to have all the answers, but by talking to people and asking questions about how would this impact your family if such and such happened or if such and such were passed, then you can make better policy. And I've seen too many politicians that are unwilling to do that, or too many politicians who don't even care. They just want to drive an agenda, and that's not how I work. And so I think that's kind of my pitch, is that I think you can see that in this interview. I appreciate your time, and I hope to have your support in November.
Great. Thank you again, Jacob, for taking the time to visit with us. We wish you the best with your campaign, and most importantly, thank you for meeting with AARP Nebraska today.
Well, thank you much for your time. Let me know if there's anything else I can answer afterwards.
Very
Thank you.
insightful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.
Great interview.